She said, I was in a demonstration, and I started to whisper, freedom. And then I started to hear myself repeating, freedom, freedom, freedom. And then I started shouting, freedom.
We've blocked all kinds of pipelines. TransCanada announced last week that it was pulling the plug on its plans for an even bigger tar pipeline out of the tar sands to the Atlantic.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on over 30 cable stations from Vermont to New York City, on the internet at thestruggle.org. A decade ago, Wendy Pearlman wrote a book about her interviews with Palestinians. Now she has another book, this with interviews with Syrian refugees. It's called We Crossed a Bridge and It Trembled. She read from it at the Blue Stockings bookstore in New York City. She was introduced by artist and writer Molly Crabapple. The anti-imperialists claim that the Syrian revolution was all caused by a CIA plot. Listen to what these refugees told Pearlman and make up your own mind.
Hey guys, I'm Molly Crabapple. I'm an artist and writer and the author of Drawing Blood over there. Today I'm here to introduce you to someone who has created something extraordinary. I'm here to introduce you to Wendy Pearlman, the editor of We Crossed the Bridge and It Trembled, Voices from Syria. Wendy Pearlman is a professor of Middle Eastern Studies at Northwestern University who has been covering the Middle East for the last 20 years. And unlike the vast majority of Westerners who cover it, she speaks perfect Arabic. This book is the product of 300 interviews conducted since 2012 with Syrian refugees, from those living in Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey to those who had made their way to Europe. It's an extraordinary work that, with poetry and passion and despair, tells the story of the Syrian revolution and the Syrian war in the words of the people who were affected by it. In the media, Syrians are most often portrayed as objects rather than subjects, as people who are talked about rather than people who speak. And Wendy's book does an extraordinary job at redressing this problem. It also does a sort of duty to history. Right now, as the Syrian war enters another phase, where it's most nakedly a proxy war between states and where the initial revolutionary elements have largely been crushed, states have an intense motivation to rewrite the narratives about the Syrian war, to pretend that it was never a revolution, to pretend that it was always something else. Wendy's book does a duty to history. It shows the way that the Syrian revolution began. It shows the atrocities that the government carried out during pursuing the Syrian war, and for that alone, it's an extraordinary and precious document. And with that, I'd like to invite Wendy to read from her book.
Thank you so much. Perfect. Thank you so much for that introduction, including probably exaggerating the perfectness of my Arabic, but I will take it because it's a lifelong project, as those of you who study Arabic know. So thank you so much for having me. So the book is an oral history that we'll talk about more. The introduction is in my voice that lays out some basic context and facts about the Syrian conflict, its origins through to the present. But the rest is divided into 8 parts, and each of which consists entirely of a curation of testimonials, excerpts from these interviews that I did over many years, as Molly and I will talk about. So what I'd like to do then is read a few of these excerpts from across the book, from the beginning memories of history through the start of the revolution up to the present, just to give you some sense of that historical arc that the book covers and some sense of the feel of the voices that are presented. So I'll begin with a few from the first part of the book, which is titled Authoritarianism. Here are the words of Saleh, a landscaper from Dara. He said, "We don't have a government. We have a mafia. And if you speak out against this, It's off with you to Beit Cheltu, your aunt's house. That's an expression we have. It means to take someone to prison. It means forget about this person. He'll be tortured, disappeared. You'll never hear from him again. The next excerpt from Ilyas, a dentist from Rolhama. He said, Syria had the appearance of being a stable country, but in my opinion, it wasn't real stability. It was a state of terror. Nobody trusted anyone else. Don't talk. The walls have ears. If anyone said anything out of the ordinary, others would suspect that he was a government informant, just trying to test people's reactions and gather a sense of what was going on. It was a regime based on command and obedience. Every state institution recreated the same kind of power. The president had absolute power in the country. The principal of a school had absolute power in the school. At the same time, the principal is terrified. Of whom? Of the janitor sweeping the floor, because they're all government informants. Also about authoritarianism, the words of Ayhan, a web developer from Damascus, who said, the brainwashing process starts when you go to school. We love the leader, we love the regime. Without them, the country will collapse. You grow up with that in the back of your head, constantly reminding you that we are living due to the grace of the Assad family. But even as an innocent child, you see that the whole system just reeked. It fed on corruption and grew. If you want to get a passport, you have to bribe this guy and kiss that guy's ass, excuse my language. From when you're little, you're taught that this is the only way to survive in this country. As an active member of the ruling party, you're going to get better grades, better chances for better schools or jobs. Everything is handled by how loyal you are to the regime. So you're raised on the principle that you have to show your loyalty. From part 3 of the book titled Revolution, the words of Shirin, a mother from Aleppo. She said, oppression was residing in us. It was part of our life. Like air, sun, water, we didn't even feel it. Like air is there, and you never ask, where is the air? But then, in 1 second, in one shout, in one voice, you blow it up. You defy it and stand in front of death. You have an inheritance, and after 30 years, you slam it on the ground and shatter it. Don't even imagine that it was easy to go out to a demonstration. No amount of courage allows you just to stand there and watch someone who has a gun and is about to kill you. But still, this incredible oppression made us go out. I encouraged my nieces and nephews to come with me to demonstrations. I felt that if they didn't try that experience, they'd be missing the real meaning of life. When you chant, you shudder, and your body rises, and everything you imagined just comes out. Tears come down, tears of joy, because I broke the barrier. I am not afraid. I am a free being. Sadness and happiness and fear and courage, they're all mixed together in that voice, and it comes out strong. Another voice from the section Revolution, Rima, a writer from Sweden. She said, I was in a demonstration and I started to whisper, freedom. And then I started to hear myself repeating, freedom, freedom, freedom. And then I started shouting, freedom. I thought, this is the first time I have ever heard my own voice. And I told myself that I would never let anyone steal my voice again. From the next section, titled Militarization, the words of Captain, a fighter with the Free Syrian Army from Aleppo. He said, "When demonstrations began, security forces came. We agreed that if they were going to shoot bullets, then we needed weapons, too. We were only chanting in the streets. We could have chanted for the rest of our lives without anyone even paying attention to us. But when the regime started attacking us, a lot of people who were on the sidelines started to join and protest, too. Because of the blood. Blood is what moves people. Blood is the force of the revolution." From the section titled Living War, Abu Firas, also a fighter from Idlib. He said, "At first, 1 or 2 people were killed, then 20. Then it became normal. If we lost 50 people, we'd say, 'Thank God, it's only 50. It's been so long since I heard that someone died of natural causes." From part 7, titled Flight, hear the words of Talia, who went on to become a TV correspondent. And she said, "The night before I left was the longest night of my life. I was alone with the kids, and the planes were in the sky all night. The sound of planes is scarier than the sound of barrel bombs, because you hear them and wonder when the bombs will drop. The waiting is harder than the actual attack. I didn't know if we'd leave the next day, or if this would be the night that we died. I had seen children torn in pieces before, but I wasn't strong enough to see my own kids in that state. I needed to get them to safety. The kids woke up and I got them dressed. I got 2 pieces of paper and wrote our names and phone numbers and put them in their pockets. That way, if someone got killed, people would know their identities. I waited for the driver outside. I kissed the walls on the street because I knew that I was never coming back to them." From the final section of the book, titled Reflections, the words of Edom, a media organizer from Latakia. He said, "One of the most profound things that I've learned from this experience is that the process of finding out what a country needs is never clean. Of course, when you're in a stable country with functioning institutions, it's easy to have a moral code. But these values are only possible because other people did dirty things to put that system in place. We opened a Pandora's box. We had this innocent childlike interest to see what was inside the box. We thought we'd get a present, and what we got was all the evil in the world. Now we need to close the box again, but it's going to take a while. Now I'm working with an NGO that helps the free media inside Syria. I see my job as trying to support people who want to make their dreams come true. But I'm too old to dream now. In a month and a half, I'll be 29. Thank you.
Syria is not that much in the news these days. But remember, there's still 800,000 Syrians under siege, almost all by Assad, Iran, and their allies. Of these, some 400,000 are in eastern Ghouta, which is near Damascus. About a week ago, there were some terrible pictures on social media of one very small child starving to death, and he died the next day after the pictures. This photo appears to be an infant sleeping. Actually, Siege Watch says that 1-year-old Maram died of kidney problems in eastern Ghouta. she was refused evacuation by Assad forces. The network RPM hasn't forgotten about Syria. Go to rpm.world to see their recent resolution about prisoners of Assad forces. On November 2nd, 100 years ago, a British minister named Lord Balfour declared a Jewish homeland on Palestinian land that British generals had just conquered. 30 years later, the area was declared the State of Israel by the Zionist movement, and the descent into Israeli apartheid began. Across Palestine, the Balfour Declaration was mourned in many areas. These are pictures from Nablus. They called on UK Prime Minister May to apologize for the declaration. Of course, she isn't about to, and in fact, hosted Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu in London to celebrate the anniversary. Nearby, there was a protest by British Jews, Orthodox rabbis, and their followers who also protest the Balfour Declaration. Zionists claim to represent all Jews, and this is a lie. Many Orthodox and many secular Jews reject Zionism completely. According to the United Nations, carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere increased last year at a record rate. It's now at 403.3 parts per million, up from 400 just the year before. Scientists warn if we don't get back to 350 parts per million, we face climate disaster. With that bit of bad news, we present another chunk of Bill McKibben's excellent climate talk at Yale, which he entitled Simply Too Hot.
People literally having to leave their homes forever. That's Micronesia. These people's houses are now wet. They can't live in them anymore. By the way, as we're going through, I could literally show you these pictures all day and all night because there's 75,000 of them in our Flickr account, and you're welcome to go look at it. One of the things that's most compelling about them, and that struck me, I'd spent my whole life hearing that environmentalism was something that rich white people did, and if you didn't know where your next meal was coming from, you wouldn't be an environmentalist. It was very early on into the process of this work that we realized, just from looking at the pictures coming in from all over the world in day after day of action, that almost everybody we were working with was poor and black and brown and Asian and young, because that's what almost the whole world is composed of, okay? That's who the leaders of this movement are. It must be said that it has crossed my mind once or twice that rich white people might be slightly more the problem than the solution, okay, to some of our woes. But we will leave that for the moment. The pictures were amazing. If it wasn't drought, then it was flood. These people are in the part of Pakistan that in 2010 saw the greatest flood since Noah. It rained so hard in the Khyber Pass that by the time that water had trickled down, 25% of Pakistan was underwater. 20 million people were out of their homes. And if you look at them, it does not take much imagination to know that they are not the cause of the problem that they are the victim of. Okay? What these people are demonstrating is what our job is at this point, and this is the fifth and final section of this talk. Our job is to speed up the pace at which we make this transition, to act as accelerants in this process, to figure out each one of us in our lives and in our organizations how to build the movements that push hard enough to make this change happen fast enough to matter. I show you that picture because it's not a big demonstration. It might be the smallest one that we ever had, but it's just 6 kids or 7 kids in a street in Lake Cay in Haiti that turned into a river in a storm. I show it to you for 2 reasons. One is the sign that those kids are holding. Your actions affect me, which is true. We've seen what happened to the Caribbean this last month with islands literally obliterated. There's nobody living on the island of Barbuda anymore. People have been there for hundreds of years, but now there is no one there because there is no place to live. Your actions affect me, but not vice versa. There's nothing that anyone in Lake Cay can do to materially affect the outcome of this problem. They can't burn less fossil fuel because they don't burn any now. They can't come to the gates of the White House and try to convince the world's sole superpower to do the honorable thing because we don't let them into the country to come do that kind of thing. Okay? They can't divest their holdings in fossil fuel companies because I would wager that the entire pool of investment capital in the entire island of Haiti is considerably smaller than the Yale endowment. All right? It is our job now as institutions, as societies, as communities, to seize this and work before it is too late. The year after that was taken, Hurricane Matthew swept through the Caribbean. It did some damage up in the Carolinas, but the real damage it did was in the southwest peninsula of Haiti. 80% of the buildings in Lake Cay were destroyed. I have no idea if those kids are still alive or not, because a lot of people died in the course of that hurricane, okay? Too late for them. That's why we have to pick up the pace. And especially now that we have Donald Trump in Washington, there is no fallback argument for inaction. No sense that someone else is somehow going to take care of it. There are a number of ways in which we can do that work of picking up the pace. We help organize this whole big effort to, as we say, keep it in the ground, to keep fossil fuel where it is by blocking every proposed plan for a pipeline or a coal port or a new fracking well or whatever, coal mine, whatever it is. And those fights, which really began with the battle over the Keystone Pipeline in 2011, a battle not yet settled, but which for 7 years we've managed to keep 800,000 barrels a day of the dirtiest oil underground. Thank you to all who took part in that. That battle has now spread. People saw that one could stand up to the fossil fuel industry, and so now every one of those projects is met with resistance, and often it works. We've blocked all kinds of pipelines. TransCanada announced last week that it was pulling the plug on its plans for an even bigger pipeline out of the tar sands to the Atlantic in Canada. Just last week, Scotland became the, I think, 14th country in the world to ban fracking. We had a huge day of action 3 days ago in Australia with 45 huge demonstrations against plans for what would be the biggest coal mine on planet Earth. I am all but certain that we're going to be able to beat it because the rise of popular protest is so strong. So keep it in the ground. If there are those things happening and you can figure out how to join in that work, then you should. We have massive campaigns going on across the environmental movement now, many, many groups led really by the Sierra Club to get cities and towns and counties and states here and around the world to commit to 100% renewable energy. And that is beginning to work in a big way. At first, of course, it was Berkeley and Madison, Wisconsin that signed up, But now it's Atlanta and it's San Diego and it is Salt Lake City. When Trump pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accord, he said, I was elected to govern Pittsburgh, not Paris. The next day, the mayor of Pittsburgh said, thank you very much, we've decided to go 100% renewable in our city. So keep it in the ground, and this fight for renewable energy to provide the stimulus, the subsidy, the pace to make sure that it happens fast. And one of the other fights is to try and interfere with the financing of the fossil fuel industry. That's why this divestment fight has been so important around the world. It went much better than we ever thought it would when we launched it 5 years ago now, I guess. And at this point, there are endowments and portfolios with assets of about $6 trillion that have divested from fossil fuel. Earlier this week, 40 big Catholic institutions chose St. Francis's feast day to divest their holdings, and they included the Diocese of Assisi, which was a beautiful moment in this struggle. The hardest places to convince have been the rich elite universities on the East Coast of the United States.
Before I go, I want to mention that on Tuesday, November 28th, Yale professor Timothy Snyder, who wrote that electrifying post warning about tyranny right after the last presidential election, will be speaking for Promoting Enduring Peace. See pepeace.org for details. That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller for The Struggle.